you want to know. You're just making. Anyway, I mean, there's no.
Welcome back to Recap World. Today we are going to recap a 2011 drama thriller movie titled A Dangerous Method. A rift forms between Fred and Jung when the latter discovers that Fred's psychoanalysis cannot cure the psychological problem of Jung's patient, Sabina. But before we begin, please consider subscribing to our channel. Now, without wasting any further time, let's begin, shall we? Movie begins with a true incident of a mentally ill woman named Sabina who is confined by two men inside a carriage on a trip to clinic. Inside the clinic, Carl Jung, a doctor, meets Sabina, his new patient, to find out what's wrong with her. She tells him it's embarrassment. It makes her feel nauseated and she begins to sweat. Her father was angry with her the entire time. While she was saying that an image appeared in her head, Carl asked Sabina what the image was about. She says it was about her father's hand, that after he struck her, he would compel her to kiss his hand. Carl is with his wife Emma inside Carl's home discussing Sabina's case and stating that she is well educated and aspires to be a doctor herself. Then they discuss Professor Freud's notion on psychoanalysis without going into detail about how it's done. Carl and Sabina go for a walk in the garden outside the clinic. She states she knows her mother does not love her father because of the voices in her head. They also informed her that she would never be a doctor. Then Carl reveals that he has to leave for the military service in 2 weeks, which enrages Sabina. She tells him she is wasting her time and drops her coat. Carl takes it up and attempts to clean it by swinging the stick on it, and Sabina cries to him to stop and take her back. The nurse enters into Sabina's room and notices her toying with her meals. She goes to notify Professor, and when they arrive at her room, she is not there. She is outside in the pond, playing in the water when a couple of nurses grab her and pull her to the bathroom to give her a bath. Carl enlists Sabina's assistance with the psychoanalysis studies within Sabina's room. He forces Emma to participate in the study. When Carl asks Sabina what her thoughts are on Emma, she tells him that she is concerned about her baby and that he has lost trust in Emma. Carl returns home to see that Emma has given birth to a baby girl who is being breastfed by a nanny. She then apologizes, saying she is sorry since she promised him a son for Christmas. When Carl asks Sabina why her evenings are so difficult, she tells him that she is terrified that she feels like a cat is with her and that she feels something slimy against her back. When he asks if she was naked or masturbating, she confirms both. He asks her to recall the first time her father slapped her. She tells him that she smashed a plate when she was 4 years old. As a result, her father told her to go to a small room and take her clothing off. Then he would spank her. During the punishment, she became terrified and wet herself. Her father observes this and spanks her again. She claims she enjoys it and any form of humiliation stimulates her. Carl and his wife Emma travel to see Professor. 2 years later, Carl and the Professor Freud discusses Sabina's therapy, how she is improving and how she is doing well in medical university. They also discuss their various psychoanalysis views. Fred, on the other hand, offers Carl his own version of the dream in which his ambitions are put on hold due to his wife's first pregnancy. On the street, Carl and Sabina discuss Fred's style of thinking and how it is preferable to follow his path. Carl, on the other hand, refuses to accept this and insists that there must be another way. On a ship, Carl and Sabina discusses her being the best student in the medical university. He assures her that she has the potential to become a psychiatrist herself. Professor Fred writes a note to Carl requesting that he look after a doctor named Otto Gross for a time until he can recover him personally. Carl then talks to Otto about his well-being and his unbelief in monogamy marriage. At his request, Dr. Gross tries to get Carl to sleep and his patients, but Carl refuses. Carl and Sabina are at outdoors with the baby, discussing her lack of experience when she kisses him. Carl enters Dr. Otto's chamber and finds it empty. A message was left to him to thank him for taking care of him, and he's also instructed him to inform Otto's father that he had died. Carl approaches Sabina outside her home and begins an affair with her. He returns home once he's finished with her to find his wife, who tells him that she has a surprise for him and then shows him a yacht with crimson sails. Carl wants to end his affair with Sabina inside Sabina's home for the sake of his wife. He was initially hesitant to start contact with her, but she eventually persuades him. Then she inquires as how he is with his wife in bed and requests that he punish her in bed. Outside on campus, Professor Freud and Carl discusses Carl being Freud's her apparent, and Carl informs him of the note that Otto left. Fred apologizes to Carl to forcing him to talk in Otto. Professor Freud and Carl debate over their theories and their application in psychoanalysis within Professor Freud's office. They then discuss a report that Carl has taken a patient as his mistress, which Carl rejects. Carl tells Sabina inside her home that they must cease their affair, since Professor Freud may have discovered it. Devastated, Sabina attempts to persuade him not to leave her, but he does so anyhow. Leaving Sabina in tears, Sabina enters Carl's office to confront him about how he admitted to her mother that they are having an affair. Then he tells her it's not his fault, as her mother was already aware due to anonymous letters she got. He tells her that they can see one another as a doctor and a patient, but nothing else. As her wrath takes over, she grabs a knife and slashes him across the face. And before she goes, she pays the consolation fees of 20 francs. Sabina writes a letter to Professor Freud on a very important topic for both of them. After reading it, he writes a letter to Carl asking whether he knows her, and Carl replies that she was the case that brought them together, and he asks the professor to act as go-between for them in order to avert disaster. The professor writes Sabina a letter in which he states that from what he understood, she and Carl used to be excellent friends but are no longer. Whatever the problem is, they should resolve it without his involvement. Carl is packing up his belongings inside Carl's office as Sabina walks in. As she asks him if he is leaving the hospital because of her, he responds that he was about to leave anyhow. She informs him that she received a letter from Professor Freud and accuses him to convincing the professor that she is lying about their affair. She demands that he send a letter to Freud giving him the truth. He asks if she is blackmailing him. She then informs him that she could have had destroyed him but decided not to, and he agrees calmly to her request. The professor must write her letter confirming that Carl told him everything. As a result, she informs Carl that she would want to see Freud as a doctor instead. Carl writes a letter to Freud confessing her affair with him, and Freud writes a letter to Sabina to apologize and express his admiration for her method of settling the problem she had with Carl. Professor Freud and Carl are traveling to America on a ship, and at night they are on the deck of the ship discussing Carl's strange dream and the interpretation of it. But the professor is unwilling to share his dream with the doctor because he does not want to jeopardize his authority. Several years later, Sabina meets with Carl in his home in Switzerland to discuss her newly written dissertation and their sexuality views. She informs him that when she graduates from university until she leaves Zurich and will not return, Carl sobs and begs her not to leave, but she continues to do so. Sabina graduates as a psychiatrist 2 years later in Vienna, where she meets Professor Freud. They talk about psychoanalysis. She asks him if she has a disagreement with Carl. He claims that he does not. Sabina wants the two of them to cohabit so that psychoanalysis can continue. As Fred gains confidence in her, he asks whether she is willing to care for one or the two of his patients. Carl and Freud correspond for a while until the professor decides to stop their friendship, owing to Carl's involvement with Sabina and his immoral behavior. Sabina meets Emma in Carl's house in Switzerland, and it is revealed that Sabina is married and pregnant. Emma informs her that her husband has been ill since he and Professor Freud served relationship, and she wonders whether Sabina can assist him. Carl is sitting on a bench in the garden by the river when Sabina walks in and sits next to him. He discovers that she is married to a doctor named Pavel, and she observes that he is not doing well. He then responds that he has been having bad dreams, and she tells him that she wants to return to Russia with her husband. Carl discusses his friendship with Freud as well as the difference. He tells her that he hates living here, but there is nothing they can do about it. Now, Carl appears to be caught in the past while Sabina moves on with her husband, and this is where the movie ends. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, until next time.